Hey, Recreators, this is Nick, and you're listening to the Life Recreators Show. This is the show that dives into learning, healing, and growing after spiritual abuse. And each week, we tackle the difficult conversations so that we can learn how to fully walk in the freedom of Christ as a new creation. I want to welcome you out to the show, and I am super excited about today's episode. Today, we're actually going to be diving into a conversation that I had with Pastor Keith Heyward. If you've been following the show for some time, we've been talking about how do we move forward? How do we take those next steps after we've been hurt, after we have experienced these difficult situations? And so, me and him in this conversation, we dive into just that topic. And so, on this episode, you're going to hear from him a little bit about himself, his background, what he's experienced, what he's gone through, and how he was able to use those experiences to help move forward. I think there's going to be some great gems, some great nuggets in here that you're going to find with this conversation. And there's going to be a second part to this as well. So without further ado, let's jump in to tonight's conversation, Candid Convo with Pastor Keith Heyward. On today's show, I am excited to bring on Pastor Keith Heyward. I'm going to read a little bit about Pastor Heyward, and then I'm going to bring him on the show, and we're going to dive into some questions this evening. So Reverend Keith Heyward is the senior pastor of Debar Christian Center in Chesapeake, Virginia. Pastor Keith, as he is affectionately called, is a man of strong convictions and dogmatic in his belief that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. He is a man who has been tried in the fire and has emerged on instrument ready to be used of God. He is a soldier in God's kingdom who is willing to be used to bring about victory for God. He has reckless faith because he believes God is sovereign and that he can do all things through Christ. He is apt to teach and unique in his ability to mix laughter and learning. Pastor Keith has served as the head of pastoral care and the married couples ministry, as well as worship leader and choir director. He is known for his hospitality, interior decorating, coordinating group events, and doing whatever his hands find to do. Ordained to the ministry at Debar Worship Center in Brooklyn, New York, by his senior pastor, Bishop H. Curtis Douglas. Pastor Keith served in New York faithfully for 4 years until sent out to pastor a branch church in Chesapeake. He previously served at the Elim International Fellowship in Brooklyn, New York for 10 years. Pastor Keith and his wife, Pastor Andrea, have 2 daughters, Ashley and Amber. I am so excited to have you on the show, Pastor Keith. How you doing?
I am doing great. I hadn't heard that bio in years. Oh my goodness. But
Hey, I was like, this was good. As I was reading it, I was like, man, this is real good. I'm excited to hear it, boy. I'm
it
telling you.
is. But I'm doing good. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like I had mentioned as we were introducing it, this is just a topic or a conversation where we just dive into some things. I know you and I, we've had some really good conversations over the last few months about healing, about moving forward. I know you actually inspired and sparked a lot of some of the thought in some of the recent shows and the topics that I was diving into on just really learning to move forward. As we dive into this, I'm curious if you would like to share with everybody so tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your background? How did you get into ministry? Like your bio said, you've been ordained for some time and have served in the ministry. So give us a little bit of your background and who you are and where you're coming from.
Candid conversation. Here we go. I grew up on the streets of the Bronx, New York. I grew up in a single parent household. My mom was great. My mom was strong. She had 4 boys and she was strong on us and didn't want us turned over to the streets. However, we became adults and we found the streets because it's really all we knew. And being on the streets of the Bronx, I turned to drugs. I turned to alcohol. You're looking at a former crackhead. I was nice and trim back then, but it is what it is. Life goes on. But you're looking, I abuse crack. I abuse cocaine. I abuse marijuana. I did a lot of drinking, you name it, I did it. I'm from the streets of the Bronx. I know The streets are in me. Although Jesus is in me, salvation is in me. Don't be fooled. I'm still from the streets of the Bronx. I have two daughters, and I used to tell my girls, I said, you can't play a player. It took them a while to learn because they really think that we're old and we just don't know. But I grew up on the streets of the Bronx. I abused drugs, and I remember clearly one day I was sitting in a club and I was in the basement and I was sitting by the window and the window was painted black. And I remember there was a little hole and it was Sunday morning and it was about 6, 7 a.m. And I was peeking through that hole while I'm sniffing cocaine and I'm saying, oh, Lord, please don't let me die here. Don't let me die like this. I know that you have something more. And I was pleading, but I was still getting high while I'm pleading. I said, I still know that you have something better for me. I said, just like that lady. And there was a black lady, older lady. She was getting on the bus, Bible in hand, going to church. And that was me one time. And that day, I believe that was my turnaround. And this was now back in September, I believe around September 16th, 1986 was
Wow.
when I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And I was out getting high one night with a friend that was a believer. He bought me a beer and we went to his house and he talked, but I heard with a new ear that day. And I went home and I got on my knees and I asked the Lord to save me. And that was the beginning of change. And I remember the next day I went out to my cut buddies, my group, and I said to them, I got saved last night. And I remember my friend Rodney, who's now going on, he's passed away. I said to Rodney, I said, I got saved. Rodney looked at me, and I'm a jokester, as you say, I mix a laughter with ministry. And I remember saying to Rodney said to me, he said, I believe you. And I kept hanging with him. And I would drink. And as I was drink with them, the conviction was extremely heavy. And I had to change. I couldn't do it. And so eventually I stopped hanging around with my best friends and I began to back away. And I still drank. I stopped with the Lord delivered me from the crack cocaine, the marijuana, but I still drank, but I never allowed them to see me drink. I would just go home from work, go upstairs, drink, whatever. And eventually the Lord just did a change in me. And that's how I got saved and I started going to church. Once I got into church, I was going to Bible study and I was just learning and I was growing. And I remember being in one of the churches. In my adult life, I've only been a member of 3 churches. My church is now the 4th church. And the initial church that I went to, that I was going to while I was getting high, I was still in the house of the Lord, but I was going to church, getting high, but I stayed in the house of the Lord, except for that particular Sunday. And so I was at that church. I was growing in the Lord, and the Bible study teacher wasn't the pastor, but another gentleman. He taught Bible, and he gave me a scripture, and he said, "I need you to chew on that scripture." And that scripture was Galatians 1:10. It says, "For do I now seek to please man or God, or do I seek to please man? For if I yet please man, I cannot be the servant of Christ." And he told me to just chew on that, and I began to chew on that, and it began to make sense to me. And I was hungry for more. And I started thinking about why am I here? Why am I here at this church? And I was like, because of the choir. I'm here pleasing man. And I found that I cannot be the servant of Christ as long as I'm here pleasing man. And that made sense to me. And it was that day that I spoke to the pastor and I left that church and I went to another church and I began to grow. I got married. Life was just wonderful. And I grew in the Lord. I grew in the Lord. I grew in the Lord. Things began to happen where we were that we weren't happy with, that we didn't like. It's a thin line because I know that Pastor Nick talks about spiritual abuse, but it's just that we were watching things that we didn't like. We were watching things that we disagreed with. And sometimes you can stay and fight, or sometimes you find that you have to move on. And it was difficult because that was my life. That was 10 years there. And it was a wonderful place. I loved being there. And I remember I said, Lord, what do I do? What should I do? Should I stay or should I leave? And then the Lord says to my previous church, he says, why did you leave that church? And I said, for do I now seek the favor of man or Christ? Or if I yet please man, can I be the servant of Christ? He says, there you go. That's how he spoke to me. He says, there you go. So I thought about it. If I stayed, who am I pleasing? Man. If I left, who would I please? God, because it allows me now to grow and to want more. And that was where the decision came that we move on. It was a hurtful thing. And my concern, my thing is, because of that last move, we found so many people that we knew and ran into people that was once in that church or that we once knew. Where do you go to church? I don't go to any church at all. And we found there was a lot of people out there that was spiritually broken. They were hurt in the church, and their plan is to never go back to church again. And that's how they saw it. I never stopped going to church. That very next week, I was in service and I kept going. I was broken, I was hurt, but my wife and I, we kept going. We kept going. And that's where we are. That's what my job is. I want to help people move on. My thing is, if you've been spiritually broken, if you've been spiritually hurt, and if you're in that pain and you're still at home, you're still broken. Don't think that you're healed because you've left that place. You're still broken, and they still have a hold on you and a hold on your life. You are stuck. And I would like, if we can possibly, to just help people to get from unstuck. Like I said, I stayed in the church. I was broken. And I remember when I went to my next church, where I sat and there was a mirror right in the front of me. So every week I had to look at myself and watch me heal. I looked at me in the eyes and I watched myself heal. And am I going on too much, Nick?
Oh, no, you're good. You're good. You're good. You're good. You're good.
So, but I watched me heal, and I was able to move on. And now my wife and I, we're pastoring. But I would like to just help people step out of stuck and move on in the Lord.
Absolutely. And so I think you brought up and first off, let me thank you for sharing that story, because like I feel, and I'm just learning the power and the impact of just being able to share your story with others so they can understand that they're not the only ones that are going through it. So you brought up some really good points. I think the first thing that I want to ask you and throw out there is, I know that you said you had that experience where you got hurt, you felt hurt by this situation that ended up happening, and you moved right into another church. What do you think? Because, and you even brought it up too yourself, was that there's a lot of times we experience these difficult situations within the church and these hurtful situations, and then we leave and we remove ourselves out of them, and then, like you said, we're stuck. It's like we get in this mode where we're like, I don't want to go and put myself back in that situation. In your circumstance, what do you think it was that helped you to make that transition when you left that one church and you were able to transition into another church and able to find healing in that church? So what do you think helped in that transition period for you?
First of all, where I went, that pastor was my friend, and you just mentioned him in my bio, and I had somewhere to go, and the church was in me. The church was in me. It's a part of who I am. It's where I came from. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to put this back into focus. And sometimes if I click off of it, it goes back. My bad. But the church was in me. So I was never going to not go to church. I've never been not gone to church, no matter what I've done from a child. We were in church every Sunday. And I believe a lot of people today, they don't go back because they're surprised that that's where they got hurt. That I went to church to be safe. I didn't expect to get hurt in church. And it was in me. I had to go to church. I knew where I was going the next week. And I planned it like I planned my escape. Like a person being abused, you have to plan your escape. You have to plan when you're leaving. You have to think this thing through. And I thought it through. We thought it out. We thought it through. And we knew exactly where we were going. We had some place to go. A woman running from a man being abused, she has to have a plan. You got to know where you're going. And we knew where we were going. So
Wow.
it's the same thing, same
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah. So I think you brought up a really good point, is having a plan on knowing what you're going to do as far as when you move on from that situation. So now with you and your wife, did y'all, because I know that's obviously something that I've thought about, and something that even in, my own story was an issue, just making sure that me and Roberta, me and my wife, we were on the same page as far as, okay, we're wanting to move on, we're wanting to leave, but making sure we're on the same page. So when y'all were making that transition, was it a plan that you and your wife said, okay, hey, this is what we're going to do? And like you guys were on board on the same page? How did that kind of feel, and how did that play out once everything was happening?
That's good. And I'm sure you'll agree. The wives get it first.
Exactly, right? Exactly.
The
That's
wives
the
get
thing,
it
right?
first. It's like,
Yeah.
my
And we're
wife
like,
is like,
what's going on?
what are you waiting on? Can't you see? Don't you know? Are you
Yeah.
asleep? So it's always the wives. And so like puppy dogs, when we come on board, when we get on board, we mention it as we got this bright idea. Why don't we move on? And your wife is like, you think? So, but
Exactly.
they
She's waiting for
generally,
you
if
to
some
get on the
reason they
page.
get it first. And as
Right.
men, when we're committed, as a man, when we're committed, but my wife got that thing, but she just waited for me, and she understood the dilemma that I was in. That was my new life, and I had to work things out and work things through. So that's
Okay.
all.
Gotcha. All right, let's move a little bit forward. I think that's really good for us to know. I think you brought up some good points. Is that, let's say a person is in that situation, just having a plan, knowing, hey, this is how we're going to move forward, or this is where we're going to move forward in. I think looking back on it, even my own personal experience, when we did move forward, I didn't really have like a plan of kind of any sort. I didn't really know what was going on. I was just like, all right, well, we're just gonna go. So I think that's really important. In in the new environment that you're in, the new church that you were in after you had this experience, and after you went through that, talk to me a little bit about, what, I guess, what was it about the environment that allowed you to begin to open up and start the process of healing? Because I know you had mentioned before that when you did move to that church of Pastor Douglas, who is a good friend of you, what was it about that environment that when you started recognizing, okay, this is what was in the environment, and allowed you to start saying, okay, I can open up, I can move forward in this healing process? Does that kind of question make sense, what I'm saying?
Yes. Uh, he had been through the process like
Hmm.
2 years before. So he was fine. He was healed, and he opened his church. The day I left was his first day of having church. And so the next week, I had a place to go. But so we were able to talk about it. We were able to talk. Anytime a person is broken, unless you can talk about it, it stays in you. And we sometimes wonder why our bodies deteriorate. It deteriorates because we don't talk about it. Men, it goes on our shoulder, but we are mental mess. And when it comes to women, messes with their reproductive system. And sometimes they're wondering why they're swinging. They're wondering why their cycle is so strong, why the cramps are so strong, because that's where everything goes when it comes to women. Now, we're talking Candid, gifted me in that area. So, gifted me in that area to pray for women and to see those things and to bring healing in that area. So I know and I understand what I'm talking about. And the women that are here on, you will agree with me. But I know because this is where it goes. It goes there. To men, for men, we turn to other things and the brokenness. I'm going to be a little bit open. I'm just going to make a U-turn and I'm going to come right back. I promise you. Because I shared about I didn't just drink and did crack and did cocaine because I just wanted to do it. I grew up in a good home. I grew up in a great home. I had a great family, but somewhere along there, the enemy got in and I ended up being the product of molestation. And it wasn't until I became a man later on, this is how I tried to deal with it, with the thought of it. And I never really dealt with it until I met my wife. She was the first person that I ever told. And it was then that I began to talk about it. And I share it from the pulpit. So I don't have a problem with it now. I've made altar calls and had hundreds of people coming to the pulpit, coming to the altar, wailing and crying regarding this matter. And for some people to be broken and to be hurt in church, having to have been hurt, and a lot of people, it's so devastating and they stay home because they weren't just broken and hurt in church, but they were broken and hurt on the outside of the church, and they came to the church for solace. And this is where it happens again. They're devastated. They're home, they're stuck, and they have no intentions on coming back into the church because they will never allow that to happen to them again. But I want you to know that God didn't do this to you, but the Lord is still there. And he's there for us to turn to. So it's something that we can deal with. It's something that can be worked through. So I understand your hurt. I understand the process. And it's like I got duped twice. And I get it and I understand, but there's help out there for you. You just have to get back. You have to take your life back, especially your spiritual life back, because as long as you are home, you think you're fine, but you're not. Sorry, sir, but Candid Conversations, we talked.
That's it. That's it. Hey, I think you did I think that everything that you brought up in there, I think makes a lot of sense. And it it brings up some really good points. So one of the first things that I just, I thought about with what you were just saying was how important it is. I think you mentioned it. You said when you moved to the new church that you were there in, that you had somebody that was there to be able to help you. Pastor Douglas had
Absolutely.
gone through it and he had experienced it. And I think that when you look at that, you realize how important it is really to be able to find someone and really pray for somebody and find somebody that has gone through it and maybe processed it. And that's what happened in our situation. You and I met,
Absolutely.
we started talking, I shared my story, and you're like, hey, I've already gone through that and experienced that. And it allowed me to say, oh, okay, you understand exactly what I'm going through. And you understand how to help along because you know what the different, points can
Absolutely.
be. So now, like, my thing that I would bring up, because you did bring up another good point, I think you were saying, is that you experienced that these events in your past, right? And it's almost kind of like you were saying, like you went through these different things and experienced these different things, and then you get into this environment that almost kind of if you don't, like you said, if you move and you leave out of that environment, you don't find somewhere where you can get settled in, it would be easy for you to go back to and retract to the abuse that you already know or the experience that you already know. I think my thing that I would ask and the thing that I would throw out is, how do you help somebody, or how do you encourage somebody to be willing to even move into another church situation, be willing to move into another situation of opening up trust in someone to be able to move forward? How would you answer how do you felt that how do you, in your mind, how do you felt that you were able to kind of handle that and deal with it? And then how would you encourage somebody else in their kind of process and journey?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. And there's a couple of things here that's in play. Your spiritual growth is in play. Your relationship with the Lord is in play. It's who is it? Who are you angry at? Are you angry at the church? Are you angry at the person that hurt you? Are you angry at the Lord? Are you angry with the Lord because he allowed this to happen? Did this happen because you took your eyes off the Lord, as Peter did when he was walking on water? Did this happen because you put more trust in man than you put in the Lord? There are a whole lot of things at play, and that's one of the things that you need to look at first. Having been hurt, having been in that situation, you have to look at your relationship with the Lord. Did I really have a relationship with the Lord? Was I pleasing the Lord, or was I pleasing man? Who were you pleasing? And sometimes, and even with my situation, the scriptures were my, I could tell you some stories, but the scriptures were my final authority. I always turned to the scriptures for answers. I didn't turn to man for answers. And so that you have to find that balance. You have to find, how did this happen? What was your, where were you responsible in this happening? Did you see it, and did you ignore it, what you were seeing? So you just have to wrestle with all of those and find an answer. Tell yourself the truth. And after you've told yourself the truth, you can be on your way. There are others that are there. Then you need to reach out. You need to walk back up in the house of the Lord. Because if you're feeling far from the Lord, guess who?
Gotcha. Okay, so I definitely, and I appreciate that response. I think it does help to help put it in perspective, where we have to realize that at some point, just like you said, for us, it's important for us to take that responsibility and try and move forward and try and keep continuing to move forward to it. But my thing would be then, why do you feel that, on the flip side to it, because I like to just be a flip side of the advocate, why do you
It's
feel that
fine.
it's so, why do you feel that it can be so challenging and difficult to go through that, or to really try and make, like, why is it, like you said, that so many times people can get stuck if they do move on from that situation? Why is it that we it's so hard for us to wrestle with moving on? What do you think on that?
And sometimes we do it out of pity. It's just, it could be a level of maturity. We want God to feel sorry for us, and we want the Lord to do something, but the Lord is doing something. He's waiting for you. He's keeping you. He's keeping you safe. He's keeping you well, but he's waiting for you to jump back on board. You just have to get back in there. David messed up. David
Yeah.
messed up really bad. David killed a man just to get with a woman. He
Hmm.
killed a
Hmm.
good man. He killed one
Right.
of his best soldiers just to get with this woman.
Hmm.
But he was able to come back and say, Lord, I'm sorry, I messed up. And the thing is, when we walk away from the Lord, because when you walk away from the church, basically you're possibly walking away from the Lord, your relationship with the Lord. You have to find your way back, and you have to forgive the Lord. You have to forgive yourself. You even have to forgive the person that hurt you in the church, because that's the only way to move on. That there's a whole process of forgiveness in order for you to get back in there, in order for you to do this. And you can do it. You just have to convince yourself that it's the right thing to do. And sometimes we don't want to, but you have to find your way back.
Right.
You just got to
Right.
find a way.
Wow. So I hope you enjoyed that conversation, or the start to that conversation that I had with Pastor Keith Heyward. It was packed with a lot of wisdom, a lot of experience. And I think that's where I was really excited about having that conversation with him, was because he was able to give me a perspective, give us an understanding of having gone through some of the things that we talk about on this channel, having experienced some of the things that we talk about on this channel. And so I think that you're going to want to definitely check in for part 2 of that, because we start diving into some great topics based on what he even mentioned in this first part. But we're talking about some more forgiveness. We're talking about things that we can look for, things that can help us move along. And that's really what our channel is all about, is helping people to learn, to heal, to grow through these hurtful experiences, and really to just move forward to God's purpose. And so I hope you were encouraged by that. Do me a favor, if you got some value and you made it to the end here, do me a favor, hit that like button for me, subscribe, turn on that bell notifications. We go live every Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern time. And we're talking about different things like this. How do we heal? How do we grow? How do we learn from these experiences of spiritual abuse and church hurt? And so just how do we, move forward from that? So definitely do me a favor and do that. Check in next time. Check in next week for the second part to this candid conversation with Pastor Keith Heyward. And until then, as always, keep learning, keep healing, and keep growing. I'll catch you later.